I'm going to move to our next slide. For those of you who may not know who Engage to Excel is outside of recruiting solutions, we also offer onboarding, recognition, or employee recognition, manager development, and also CXS, which is our engagement and engagement survey solutions, excuse me. So Darren, I'm going to send it over to you to start.
All righty. Well, thank you very much, Melissa. And thanks everybody for joining today. Hopefully this won't be like a typical webinar where we have slides and just present data. We're going to kind of slow it down a little bit and really just hopefully create a conversation between Dr. Charles and I. I'm Darren Findley. I am the president of Recruitment Solutions at Engage to Excel. I've been in recruiting about 35 years. Back when we used Rolodex, that was our AI. That's the only AI we had was a Rolodex. And I've been engaged to Excel about 9.5 years now, so going on 9 years. So I'm glad to be here. In my off time, like today, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, by the way, and today it's like, I don't know, it's like 82 degrees here in the end of October. It's a beautiful sunny day, so I love to go hiking back in the hills behind our house or around the lake. So when I'm not, looking at a computer screen or reading about labor market analytics, I'm usually out hiking somewhere. And so I just want to say thank you for Dr. Charles for joining today as a guest and comrade of ours here at Engage to Excel, and just really pleased to have this conversation with you. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Dr. Charles.
Great. Thanks so much, Darren. Really looking forward to having this conversation as well. So I'm Charles Scherbaum, the Chief Analytics Officer with Engage to Excel. I've been with Engage to Excel, wow, probably about 14 years at this point. So it's really been some time. I'm also a professor of industrial and organizational psychology at Baruch College in New York City. We're also having a beautiful weather day. Unfortunately, all of our air conditioning is off, so probably not as nice as it is in Nashville to have that kind of weather. When I'm not looking at data or looking at AI, I'm an avid runner and love live music.
You should come to Nashville sometime. You love the live music, right? It's like everywhere here. It's so awesome. It's great.
Yeah, definitely.
So today we're going to talk about AI and thinking about mostly in recruiting, and our agenda is something like what you see on the screen now. We're going to talk about the AI advantage and some trends. We're talking about data-driven decisions and how AI can help facilitate some of those. We don't want to be remiss and think about where the regulations are today and some of the litigation that's going on. And Dr. Charles is certainly an expert in this area as well. We want to talk about candidate perception along the way, and then an AI outlook and what does the future look like for AI, which is so unbelievable and so exciting. We can't wait to talk about that as well. And then we'll end up with best practices and even some Q&A toward the very end. But I think when we start out and talk about AI, we want to think about what is the definition of AI? What does it really look like? And it really is evolving every single day. And it really is this set of technologies that enables computers and software to perform a wide variety of advanced functions, including the ability to see and understand and translate spoken and written language. It is the ability to analyze data and make recommendations based on that data and what it's learning along the way. And AI uses math and logic to simulate human reasoning and the learning that can come with that. And the part of what's cool about it is it makes mistakes. It learns from its mistakes and continuously learns. And Julie, you've heard machine learning. It's all part of that as well. But what we want to really talk about today is this set of technologies that are out there that are focused on the recruiting world and a little bit in the human resources world, and kind of what is to come, in the future today. So let's kind of jump right into, what we think AI is today. And we've got a poll we want to do. So we'll kind of pause just for a second. We could kind of look up. There's a poll, should be a poll on your screen. And we'd like you to think about these questions that we have. The first question is, are you currently using AI in your hiring process? And you can answer, yes or no on that. The second question is, where are you using AI in the process? Is it in sourcing and candidate generation? Is it in screening and assessments? Is it in interviewing? Are you using it to make decisions somewhere along the way? Or are you just doing it in maybe onboarding? And maybe onboarding is described as pre-boarding in our world in recruiting, but any kind of pre-boarding or onboarding. And then the third question is, are chatbots considered AI? That's an interesting question to ask today, isn't it?
Hmm.
So think about that, how you perceive AI and how you perceive chatbots, and say, are chatbots considered AI? And then the fourth question is, where are you currently using chatbots? And so we'll look at these and look at some of these answers as we get ready to dive into all things AI in recruiting.
So Darren, I'll just give me another 20 seconds here. The answers are coming in fast.
Okay, great.
All right, I'm gonna end the poll in 3, 2, 1,
Like we
and
need,
share the results.
felt like we needed a drum roll for that.
I know.
So look at this. We've got 67% that said they are currently using AI in some
Hmm.
part of the recruiting or the hiring process. And when you look at the vast majority, well, it's not the vast majority, it's pretty even around the first three answers where you're using in the process. So sourcing and candidate generation, screening and assessments, interviewing, very little in part of the decision making, and then a little bit more in the onboarding. So that's very interesting. We'll talk about each of those here as we go through our conversation today. And then the question around, our chatbots considered AI, 71% said yes, 29% said no. So there's some mystery there. We can't wait to talk about that. And then, are you currently using chatbots? 22% said in scheduling, 22% in application assistance, answering candidate questions along the way, basic screening questions, onboarding, and then other. So really great answers. Thank you for participating in that. That's going to help drive our conversations along the way and gives us some insight to really your familiarity with AI and how it's being used today in the process. So thank you for doing that. As we go to the next slide, we want to talk about some of the things that we're seeing in AI from an industry standpoint. And, when you think about early word, like keyword matching in the applicant tracking systems, and that was really driven by, some advanced AI or maybe even just some rules based. And so for the longest time, I thought I was using artificial intelligence because I put in rules around candidate screening and candidate screening questions. I thought that was AI. That was, years ago, right? But turns out that that's just rules-based software, right? You can make decisions based on rules that are set up. But is that really AI? And AI really comes into play when it learns from those answers and learns from those rules and then modifies the responses that you're going to be getting from the technology itself, and then begins to transform how you do your sourcing, how you do your candidate generation. And so we see today that a lot of uses around that is efficiency, right? And so when you think about what AI is doing and the part of the benefits of that, it really is about the efficiencies in the candidate interaction and the chatbots, the virtual assistants that are out there, sourcing platforms, and things like writing job descriptions and making those job descriptions more closely aligned with what the job really is. Or is it taking an old junky job description and just rephrasing that? So again, you got to think about, how is AI working for you? And there are certainly steps, and I think there's a lot of baby steps that we're going through right now, and just understanding what some of the benefits are of using AI. And as we continue to mature in that and think about the AI tools that are going to be there around decision making, do you use it to analyze a candidate's cognitive ability or their emotional traits or their body language or their facial expressions? So there's a lot of things that are coming up along that. And so, Dr. Charles, when you think about some of these benefits and some of these risks, what are you seeing that's out there in the marketplace today?
I think you've really captured it well, that there's an explosion of AI and all sorts of promises. And so sometimes it is really difficult to determine what is just rules and a keyword search from things that are truly AI as we think about them, as you've interacted with something like ChatGPT or Copilot, on your computer. But certainly in the candidate evaluation components of it, whether it's assessment and screening, there's a lot of activity right now. And there's activity on both sides of the equation. So a lot of tools that are being introduced to help employers understand who might be the best fit for a particular role in the organization, and certainly a lot of tools for candidates. A colleague yesterday just introduced me to a tool that essentially does a teleprompter for you using AI to help you answer interview questions in real time. And so, certainly is all the benefits we generally think about them being accrued to the organization. Certainly there's some benefits for candidates as well, in thinking about how to use tools in an appropriate way. But obviously there's a lot of trepidation that I'm seeing as well, that the excitement of the tools that are available is, and as we'll talk about a little bit today, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of clarity that needs to be provided about what's going to be in scope and out of scope from a regulatory and a legal perspective.
We'll dig into some of those regulations and litigation here in just a few minutes. But when you think about, where we are today around the adoption barriers of AI, are you seeing anything? What are you seeing as some of the adoption barriers of people using AI today?
Yeah, I mean, certainly one is true AI is very complex. The tools are complex. And so there's a learning curve, I think, for all of us, even those of us who are, have deep statistics training, it moves so quickly that there's always something new. So, certainly taking some time to educate yourself on what is AI, how can it be used, what are the various aspects of it, things that most of you joining us today are doing for yourself. So really some education. I think some other things are people are afraid of how others will react. And we've all seen the Terminator and that in the Matrix, that is in our minds, AI. And so there is a lot of concern that in difficult labor markets, and particularly for hard to recruit positions, the application of AI, may be a turnoff to some candidates, and they may react poorly. Certainly there are people that find it, to use the scientific term, creepy. To be evaluated by a computer or a computer algorithm. And the last thing I'd say is data. Certainly things like Chat GPT and Claude and some of the well-known, generative AI tools that are available. As you may have heard in the news, I mean, they just ingest millions and millions of data points from all over the internet. For a lot of organizations, it's having high quality data available that would even allow you to test, could these be of value to you? So I think at this point, for a lot of people, just access to the data to ensure the tools are doing what you want them to do.
It's kind of a good segue into the next slide when you think about data and data-driven decisions. And one of the things that I, think about from of course, I'm a labor market junkie. I love the data. I love analyzing the labor market and the data within each of these sub-markets that we're in and what drives, candidate or applicant supply and demand on both sides. And when you think about the future of AI, helping us understand that hiring landscape, not just by geography, but by job and sub-geography, right? We're going to have so much data that it really would be impossible for anyone, no matter how many late nights I stayed up reading reports, to really analyze and conceptualize what's going on. So those are some things that are really just now coming out in the forefront. You think about the amount of data that just the BLS, produces every month. It is an unbelievable amount of data. And to be able to comb through that in 10 seconds or in a minute, right? To have some kind of useful data around helping you decide, well, where are we going to hire? Where are we going to be able to find the skill sets that we're looking for? And that kind of leads us into, workforce planning. And then marrying up the data that we have internally around the workforce that we need and the skills that we need. And how do we marry that up with the labor market analytics that can be pulled and pulled together and given to us in a way that is very, very useful in recruiting. And honestly, when you think about recruiting, the data that's coming in, the biggest use case is going back to the business. Saying, hey, you know what we've got? We have a labor market that doesn't have anybody with the skill set you're looking for in location A. Location B has a lot more. So let's think about how our business is designed, how we deliver for our customers, and think about where we go find the talent to bring that in, whether it's remote workers or whether they're workers in a plant or a distribution system or in a restaurant. Those are all things that AI can help us with understanding, the landscape. I'm compelled by your background in pre-hire assessments to have you speak a little bit about data-driven decisions around pre-hire assessments and what you're seeing today in that. Yeah, we had several good percentage of our respondents in the survey said yes, they used it in assessment. So what are you seeing today?
Yeah, and just before I jump into that, you really hit on what I think is one of the most exciting and potentially beneficial aspects of AI is that, as somebody who enjoys the outdoors, if you keep fishing in the same pond, at some point it's going to be depleted. And so the idea that it opens us up to new opportunities, new talent pools that we may never have thought of. And there's so much inefficiencies, as you well know, from all the time you spend looking at economic data. There's so much inefficiency in the labor markets and so much great talent that we just never even consider. So the possibility of creating wider opportunities for the American and global workforce, and certainly for organizations to really get great talent that they may never have considered before, I think is truly transformational and, benefit for communities, organizations, and certainly the country as a whole. So I think you really hit on what's one of the most exciting parts of it. In terms of the talent and the assessment space, there is a whole lot of activity happening. And I'd say there's really two types of activity, or really maybe even three, we could say, is right now there's a lot of interest in taking existing assessment technology that we have, whether it be some form of an ability test, a personality inventory, a simulation of a job, and finding new ways of scoring it, leveraging it, making it shorter. So there's a lot of work on that. It's kind of taking what's tried and true and that we've used for many, many years, and either implementing technology into it that would enable us to do something new. And I think interviews are a great example of that, that with technology, we've moved from all interviews are done live with an interviewer and an interviewee in real time to something where candidates can now record their responses at their convenience and can schedule themselves, do it how they want, where they want, where they're most comfortable, record their responses, and it can be evaluated later. One way it could be evaluated is with AI. Certainly, we can create transcripts of those interviews and have AI, go to work in terms of evaluating the candidates. Another way that we see that AI is being used in the assessment space is really creating different types of assessments. And so right now, there's a huge interest in what we'll call gamification or game-based assessments, where we're really looking at trying to make being evaluated more fun. I'm not sure that's ever going to happen, but as somebody's a professor, I've never seen my students say the test I just gave them was fun. But certainly, trying to come up with game-based elements or making games into ways of evaluating individuals' characteristics. AI really, just given the amount of data that goes into that, AI is really well suited to that. And certainly there's been some applications, not necessarily ones that I would really advocate, but trying to dig deeper on looking at facial expressions or trying to code tone or intonation from human expression. Not a direction I'd really advocate yet. At this point, technology's not there, and I think the legal and regulatory landscape's not real favorable to those types of uses. And the last use that I'm seeing is where we're really trying to take existing data or data in some different formats and extract information about your characteristics. So it might be taking a writing sample and trying to ascertain whether you're very outgoing or not so outgoing. We might be looking at how you do an activity and assess whether you're risk averse or not. So there's a lot of uses right now trying to do something traditional, give you an assessment that we know is going to be indicative of how well you'll do as an employee on the job, and a lot of other uses that we're trying to take more day-to-day natural data that exists and to extract something quantifiable about your job relevant characteristics, hopefully job relevant characteristics.
You're not going to use my signature to determine if I'm a serial killer, right?
I will not. I can't promise you that AI won't.
It might, right? Or might determine that I'm not. So we'll see about that. So I think there's
Darren,
a question.
yeah,
Yeah, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, Dr. I was going to say we have a question. It's a great one. You talked about being able to use AI to evaluate transcripts of interviews to make evaluation decisions. Isn't that one of the hot topics of legislation and laws, regulations deterring that usage?
I'd say what we want to do is separate two things, in that we can use AI to produce some quantitative indicator about you, such as that you are, you know, we were historically evaluating candidates, let's say on a 5-point scale in an interview. AI can do that as well and give us a score that a human being can use to make a decision. And I think the question's spot on, that there's a lot of litigative and regulatory risk around things where a human is not in the loop. So if we had candidates record their interviews, submit those, AI automatically scores them, and then the AI produces a slate of here's the 20 people you should interview, and a human never evaluates that, never reviews it, that would be pretty concerning and problematic, I think, in the current environment. However, if we're using AI to help us score, to do what a human once did in terms of determining whether somebody has a high or low level of capability, and then the human reviews all of this information and makes decisions about who to hire, that's much safer territory. Now, obviously, there's a lot that would go into that to ensure you're on safe territory, but there always should be a human in the loop somewhere.
Great question. So thank you for asking. That was, again, a great segue into kind of our next slide there. So you're seeing today, Dr. Charles, the regulatory activity that's out there, even some litigation that's going on. Other than what you just talked about around the interviews, is there anything else that everyone needs to kind of be aware of and either heighten their sensitivity or don't be that afraid of it? What's your perspective on that?
I think the expression used in the question was really spot on, of this is a hot area. So, through June of this year, there were 400 laws proposed at the state and local level in the US. Not all of them become law, but that just tells you, even in an election year where people usually are resistant of passing laws and a little hesitant to do that, there's so much focus on this. So it is certainly an area where there is a lot of activity. And what is so challenging about it is, as we know, there's been quite a few bills that have been introduced at the federal level, but it's probably going to be some time before there's any passage of legislation related to the use of AI. Now, that's a little concerning for those who want to use these tools, but on the other hand, all of the regulatory agencies have come out and have very clear positions that the existing rules apply to any new tools and technology. So any best practices around ensuring that assessments are job related, ensuring that they are fair, they're accessible to all candidates, all of the civil rights laws, Americans with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination Act, all of them apply. So if you're still operating under those type of frameworks with any new technology involving AI, that's a good practice. But what I will say is that some of the creative things that the technology and AI is allowing us to do, certainly those are coming under scrutiny. I think particularly things around facial recognition and voice recognition and the scoring of intonation. There's a lot of laws that are very critical of that. For example, Maryland has a facial recognition law that would prevent some of that, as does Illinois. Colorado was the first state to pass its own AI-related act. And what's really interesting about that is it's one of the first times that the developer of an assessment tool is also on the legal hook. That traditionally it was the user that really bared the responsibility for ensuring it's job related and that it's fair. Now in these new technologies, certainly the developer of this, so that kind of changes the landscape in the assessment game a little bit. So certainly, while companies have always had responsibility, it puts a little more pressure on the vendors to make sure that things are, really well developed, really documented well, and do comply with a really complex landscape of laws. I would say at the big picture level, the White House has released an executive order 14110 that really directs federal agencies to start studying this issue and how best to consider AI in the use of services to the American people. And the White House also put out a blueprint for, responsible development of AI. And a big piece of that is around employment. and ensuring that the way that we think about AI and employment is one that essentially helps and benefits, American workers and the American economy. Now, obviously, the US is not the only place in the world that's considering these issues. Europe and the European Union passed an AI Act earlier this year that's incredibly wide-reaching, and they look at AI in terms of its risk level. And I think there's some recommendations too. There's a group on the National Standards Board for Science and Technology. They put out a risk framework to consider AI. I think if you're considering using that in your employment processes, I would definitely take a look at that. But the European Union AI Act really puts all employment uses of AI in a high risk category. So the burden's a little bit higher. And like other things that the EU has put through, given that, most global American companies operate on both continents, it gets a little difficult to do radically different things in different places. So we'll probably start seeing some of that creep into the US, Canada, China, India, incredibly large labor markets have also passed regulations that mirror the EU's in a way. But the US is unlikely to have kind of a guiding framework outside of maybe what their regulatory agencies in some large states that are large employers put forth. California had a really kind of widely publicized bill that was recently vetoed by the governor. It's likely that there will be another variation of that at some point coming up after the kind of the election cycle. So I think it is an area you really do want to pay attention to because things are changing. Now, obviously, while the regulatory and legislative processes unfold, the legal system moves forward, and there certainly have been increasingly a number of legal challenges around AI. And recently, there was a decision in California in a case of Mobley versus Workday that really focused on the use of these automated systems based on AI where humans aren't involved. And, without going into all the details of that case, essentially an individual had applied for over 100 jobs, and every single one of those employers had relied on Workday in some capacity to help with the screening process. And the way that those employers had used Workday was essentially they handed over the initial screening to the tools, Workday screened, and then forwarded a list of people that essentially met some criteria. So no human was ever involved in that process of saying, essentially thumbs up, thumbs down to those applying. And the court essentially has ruled that Workday could be considered, essentially legally liable for those decisions because they were acting as an agent of the organization, which means even if you were to outsource some of this, I don't think you can really escape having some responsibility. So I think if you're really committed to ensuring that your practices comply with all federal and local laws as they currently exist and really think about your AI in that same lens, that's a really good start. And obviously there's some unique aspects to it that make AI a little more difficult because it's so complex. And as Darren, you mentioned earlier, it can learn. So if it's learning, that means it's changing. And yet most of our regulatory frameworks and looking at fairness in assessments really have a much more static model to them. And so these do raise some challenges. So certainly if you're looking to adopt it, you really should partner with some experts in this area and ensure that whoever you partner with has extensive documentation.
Just to make sure that I'm clear, even what you're saying, when you think about liability, right, from an HR standpoint for any organization, do we need to look at our software technology vendor agreements much more closely now and look at limits of liability and all of those things to ensure that they're not, in the contract writing themselves out of being liable for any kind of bias that may occur in the selection process? So that's what you're using them for?
Yeah, that's a fantastic insight. That certainly looking at your service agreements, understanding what responsibilities are, who might hold certain types of liability, because certainly there's going to be challenges, and those challenges are only going to increase. I mean, even in the AI space, that data is always a problem, right? As I mentioned before, that's a barrier to adoption. There are workarounds. People will, there's a number of scholars who've looked at this idea called synthetic data. That's essentially where I kind of take the parameters of my workforce or the data that I do have that might be too small, and then run simulations to create data that mimics that onto a scope that I could actually use AI. So that might mean that I develop AI tools and train them on data that was, simulated, not real. And so that might be something you would want to know. So I think that certainly, not only about the service level agreements and really looking at your contracts with your partners that you have in place right now, and certainly any contracts moving forward, is really asking a lot of questions. And I think if there's no one in the room that can clearly answer them for you, that should be a red flag.
Yeah. That it's a whole new meaning to contract review now, right? And having
Oh, 100%.
the experts. It's not just the business development people that are doing those. You're bringing in real experts on what
Yeah.
liability really is. That's really interesting.
And it's hard to even understand your liability if you don't understand what the tool does. Like think about in the past, if we did an interview or we had, a traditional assessment where we were assessing a candidate's personality or cognitive abilities or even physical abilities. It was easy to understand that you needed to run, you need to do 10 push-ups, you could do 10 push-ups. You need to be able to answer these questions, you answer these questions. Some of the things being extracted from these AI and machine learning tools, it's really hard to understand what it is and ensure that it in no way relates to things that it shouldn't relate to. For example, it might find that our best workers come from particular zip codes. Well, zip codes correlate with a whole lot of things. And those certainly could run you afoul of all sorts of, legal laws in both the state, local, and federal level. So it's a really careful understanding, I think, to mitigate your risks in this area.
I just got so many things going through my mind right now around my risk that I have across the board. So that's very insightful. And again, it will just continue as it said, it changes, right? It learns and does things differently across the board. When you think about how candidates perceive, the use of AI, so you had this case against, Workday, right? Mobley versus Workday. So there was a candidate perception there that, hey, something's not quite right. It wasn't quite fair for me, right? So when you get into candidate perceptions and think about candidate reactions to those things, are you seeing kind of a wholesale pushback, or are you seeing 50-50 adoption on candidate reactions, whether it's a chat bot or whether it's an assessment? Are you seeing anything that you can comment on?
I mean, candidates generally don't like processes where humans aren't involved. And some of it, I think the interview is probably one of the best places because assessments have been in place for a long time. Most candidates have taken tests their whole life through school. So there's some familiarity and understanding there. I think when we move into these more what used to be pretty high touch type assessments and selection processes, there's a lot of negative reaction. For example, in these asynchronous video or one-way interviews, one of the best things about an interview is that if you and I, Darren, are talking, and I see you're not really understanding maybe a point I'm making, or there's something that you kind of latched onto, I could use that to continue to promote my case for a job or my fit for it. But I really lose my capacity to, influence the decision when there's no one on the other side of the camera. So candidates in general are a little bit more negative when it comes to anything where their capacity to have some control over the process is taken away. And that, something uniquely human is, really understanding another human being, their thoughts, their feelings, emotions, being able to relate to them, being able to mutually influence each other, liking, growing a connection with another human being. And as we take that away, it may not always create the best image. And that, I mean, as you well know, with your depth of experience of doing this, a lot of times these processes are about selling the candidate on you as much as it is assessing whether the candidate's a good fit. And as organizations, the move towards efficiency sometimes does come at the cost of really selling ourselves, communicating, setting the seeds for a really positive relationship between the individual and the organization. So I think there's some ways in which we might have missed out with the rush towards efficiency, which, you get it, it makes sense. When there's thousands of people applying for a job, it really is difficult to give each individual a fair and thorough consideration without using some of these tools. But, there's no free lunch on any of this.
There's not. And even as you speak about that, I think about, I love forced execution of process, right? I'm a big fan of it. It's kind of been my mantra for years, right? Let's get a process in place. We can measure it. Everyone is treated the same along the way, but also think about the relationship that's critical when you're in the recruiting process and finding commonalities that builds that relationship, whether it's a commonality between the recruiter and the candidate, whether it's commonality between the values and mission of the organization and what the candidate is looking for in their next role they're going to have, and being able to pivot real time and talk about those commonalities and sell those things that are common is going to be critical. And don't know that AI is quite there yet. I do think it will get there along the way, but I don't disagree that you have to have that cognitive ability to pick up on, did you really understand the question that I was just asking, based on a head tilt or a thought or whatever around it. So I do think that's coming. So I think that, building trust is going to be important with candidates, and let them know that this is just one piece of the process. And today we're going to do this, right? But you're going to have someone review that or get back with you, or let them know the steps in the recruiting process so they know what to expect. There's always been a best practice in candidate relationships and candidate perceptions of the organization. I don't think that goes away. And so clear communication is really going to be important, all throughout the candidate life cycle, right? Whether they're just beginning or they're getting into, a process that's elongated or panel interviews or whatever it's going to be, that clear communication really is going to be important. So I think, Melissa, we've got another poll next, and I'd love to go ahead and have you put that poll up, and let's take a look at that and see how we answer.
All right, and there's just 2 questions on this one.
So we're going to make this one easy for you. So the first question is, who in your organization makes the decision to use AI in recruiting? Is it IT? Is it your CHRO? Is it your head of talent, head of HR operations? Are the recruiters kind of free to do their own thing, or is it someone other than that? And then that's kind of just a multiple choice question that you have. And then the last one is, what are your major concerns or questions about AI using it in the hiring process? And so we're looking for more of a longer answer. So we're going to take just a little bit of time to have you put some of the responses in that one. Like I said, we'll hope we can address some of those in the next few minutes that we have. And if not, if there's specific questions, and we'll certainly address those after the fact in response to everyone that's here. So just take a second to think about who is responsible for selecting AI in the recruiting process, and then what are your major concerns or questions about using AI in the process. Give everybody just a minute for that. Maybe 10, 15 more seconds.
Yep.
Okay, Melissa.
All right, I'm going to close it out and share the results.
What everybody says. Oh, look at this. It is across the board. Well, I'm assuming in some of these as well, we'll have multiple people making this decision, right? You may have IT providing input, CHRO signs off on the spin, but head of talent, head of HR operations certainly looks at it. And then you have recruiters are probably providing input as well. But it is interesting that no single entity inside an organization is got control or has, the only say around what they want to do. So, Melissa, on the answers around the concerns,
you can't see them. I'll read them off for you if that works.
Sure, that'd be great.
All right. The first one is candidate trust and experience, risk of judgment error, not customized enough. Next one would be introducing additional bias in the interview process through the use of these tools. Gaining the confidence in use. candidates understanding an organization's culture and ensuring the candidate can play a healthy role within the team, lack of personal touch in the candidate experience, candidate perception, regulatory compliance, and the ability to demonstrate compliance, but also financial cost. How will I know I'm truly hiring top talent and not someone just using AI to get through the hiring process?
Yeah.
And Charles, this is what we were talking about yesterday. Data capture and storage. What is data that AI is trained on to make those decisions in hiring? Fantastic. What are the norms it's trained on? Can I use it for grads and senior execs? And then lastly, providing a positive candidate experience, which seems to be one of the more popular responses.
Wow, you guys got a lot of concerns.
Mm.
That's all. That is, you should be, right? As something new comes into a marketplace, as you think more and more about the advancements that are coming on, and honestly, the fast pace that these are coming on are really going to make an impact on how our organizations can adopt the new technology, use the technology, and be fair. So I think when you look at, some of the coming advancements, from AI standpoint, and you think about what is down the road, it really does begin to address a lot of these same concerns that you had around judgment, around bias, around having confidence in the use. One of the things that I was noticing that's kind of coming down the pipeline is this, not just, like in the next 5 years, you're going to see more and more personalization so that the AI can kind of personalize its approach to the individual candidate that is interacting with it, right? So that's interesting. But then if you look 10 years down the road, what you begin to see is this hyper-personalization with real-time adaptation. Kind of what Dr. Charles was talking about earlier. Like, I'm interviewing for a JavaScript developer. They asked me a question, well, real time on my screen, I get the answer to that. That's kind of weird that I can answer a software programming question that I did basic, I think, and maybe even Fortran 30 years ago, but I'm certainly not a JavaScript developer, but I could answer the question. It becomes an interesting way to adapt, using those things. And I think too about, inherent bias, what I call inherent bias control or elimination, right? So again, when you think about what AI is going to do, in the future and helping eliminate, some of that bias is really going to be, critical in being able to kind of standardize the use along the way and standardize how organizations can, not only meet the legal challenges that are going to come across, but also the use case challenges that they're going to have with adoption, of those things. And I think that is with any, kind of AI that you have out there, and you think about, how to implement it and apply it along the way, and what's the best way to do that, or how are, some other folks using that today. And I don't know, maybe go to the next slide, then always come back to this slide. On this, on the next slide, you really have, it's the same slide, just updated. Not bad. Go back just to the other use cases that we have there. So when you think about, some of these companies and some of the best cases and some use cases that are currently out there, you look at companies like, Amazon, and they're using AI really on a lot of different levels, but these are levels around really leveraging the AI and machine learning in all aspects of its operation. That includes things like recruitment. And so they built these tools to help applicants throughout their hiring process, from identifying the right position for them to give them more flexibility. And it kind of reminds me way back in the day when we were first building our own software around candidates and candidate interaction. It certainly wasn't AI. We thought it probably was, but it was just rules-based we were talking about before. But the candidate puts in their information, puts in their profile, and instead of doing a job search, like I'm going to search for a programmer job or a software developer job or a merchandising job, here are my background, here's my experience, and AI can help sort through that and go, well, Darren, here's the job you're most qualified for and the best job for you based on what we have available today. And Amazon is doing a lot of that with the way they use AI. And then you've got, Delta Airlines is using it to enhance their candidate experience and streamline recruitment to facilitate their career advancement internally as well. So there's all these use cases, and they have a chatbot at Delta that really is AI powered to help answer, candidate questions. And that's part of the way you create more transparency and more trust by getting candidates to begin to use what you have today in your system, be able to adopt the fact that they can do that seamlessly, transparently, and help them kind of accelerate their job search and then the process and things like that. So, Dr. Charles, anything you see around thoughtful implementation or other leading companies that are using AI in a way that is going to be unique or different?
Yeah, I think, and you've really alluded to the key point, is using it strategically. There's so many ways you can use it. Not all of them are going to make sense for any one company. Um, a lot of these examples are big companies with lots of applications and more than they can really sort through. So using it to create a better experience, and that, let's use Delta, which is a company very focused on its customer brand and how it relates to its customer, and ensuring that many of the people applying for jobs are Delta customers, and that there's some alignment there. And so putting tools in place that the culture of Delta kind of shows up in every way possible through every interaction with the company, whether as a job applicant or a customer, that makes a lot of sense. So, not just jumping on the AI bandwagon because you can, or because everybody's doing it, but thinking about, where would I get a unique benefit? Like you mentioned earlier, the candidate experience, and as many of our attendees today, candidate experience is the really big issue. And it's not unusual without AI for candidates to apply for a job and never hear anything. That's frustrating. And for processes to take a long time. I mean, AI can really help improve, even if it's not a human being or personalized. It takes a pretty strategic step about keeping candidates engaged in your process. So I'd say, ask a lot of questions. We talk a little bit about best practices here in a moment, but really be thoughtful about, what am I doing and why am I doing it? And what am I supposed to achieve other than just efficiency? Because if that's the thing, we're just looking for a new mousetrap.
Have you heard of anybody using it around virtual reality and augmented reality for job selection yet? Are you seeing that have you seen that anywhere?
Not as much in this job selection. Certainly if we were looking at jobs where they're technical jobs in a promotional context, we're seeing a lot of it in safety training. I mean, that's a real natural. Obviously in training doctors, training nurses, other specialists where, the practice can be dangerous in and of itself and potentially harmful. So these tools are great for feedback, right? That I could do something in virtual reality, do an incision, and AI can give me actual feedback and guidance to help me be more effective in my job. I think that is, a use that everyone's going to benefit from, these types of developmental applications. I mean, think about coaching. I mean, AI coaches are here, and some of them can do an okay job for certain types of coaching engagements.
Think about the different jobs. I think it was a report that Indeed put out, I guess just in the last month. It wasn't very long ago. It talked about the replacement potential by generative AI across different occupations, and it was really interesting to kind of see how those kind of fell out, from most likely or possible to be replaced, and then those that were not likely to be replaced. And I found a couple of things interesting. One is that things that are more white collar in nature, more office work in nature, accounting occupations, software developer, administrative support kind of roles, insurance claims, those were much more likely to have part of those jobs replaced by AI and augmented by AI. But when you got into things like, bus drivers, nurses, childcare, cooks, you really can't have AI unless you got some kind of humanoid robot doing the cooking, but maybe that's coming as well. Doing that work is less likely in the near term to really be replaced with AI. And so when you think about too, talking about best practices on the next slide, we got just a couple of things we'll kind of use to wrap up and then have maybe a minute or so for questions. Is that I think that my takeaway is that it really is going fast, and I can't keep up with it, and I wish I could. And so maybe I need an AI assistant to kind of help me keep up with all the things that are changing so fast. And I think this is at the very end of that. There's a quote at the very end of that Indeed that said the key takeaway for all workers is that while AI is unlikely to take a person's job, it's the person who knows AI is going to likely take your job. And so I thought, well, that's really interesting to learn the tools, learn what's out there, and keep up with it because it is, moving really fast. And so I think there's a couple of things that you alluded to early on around reducing our risk and really thoughtful about the candidate perception and candidate interactions. And you mentioned, analyze for unintended consequences. We talked about that the other day. So why don't you comment on that? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think the example you gave right now with Indeed is a perfect illustration of that. Is that, yeah, we can use AI and automate a lot of customer service jobs, but what's going to be left are the worst parts of the job, the really irate, upset, difficult situations to deal with. So we had, a job where, required a lot of training to deliver good customer service. Most of the calls are pretty easy and quick. Some are pretty hard. The really difficult, draining ones were kind of broken up with the easy ones. Now I've got an 8-hour shift where I'm going to have 20-minute call after 20-minute call of somebody yelling at me. That's an unintended consequence. So it's going to be hard to staff those jobs. And that's where we need really good people to deal with upset customers. So, thinking about how we're using it and not, again, chasing efficiency for efficiency's sake, but being strategic. But certainly the fast, the easy, again, there's never a free lunch. So really understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it.
And when you think about the need for human eyes, as you relate that back to even, regulatory or the current litigation, I guess it's still pretty critical that we have human eyes on these decisions around hiring, right?
Oh, yeah. Think about even for human decision, we usually have multiple human eyes on it. Performance reviews in a big company, your manager will review, and there's a second level review of that. That having multiple reviews on it has always been best practice, and the AI is not going to be able to do that for us. And as somebody mentioned, the decision errors, that's really what we're worried about, is that the AI is going to do something that really wasn't what we intended.
Well, I think this has been, even though we've talked like 4 times already about this, every time we talk, I learn something new. So I just want to say thank you for joining today and just helping us talk to a very complex subject that, although everybody's talking about it, it's still no real clear path. And so I would just encourage everyone to don't be afraid to experiment. And I'll give kudos to Greg Rake and Andrea Shepard on our team. They're constantly experimenting with different technologies that are out there. And some of them work wonderfully, and some of them are that kind of bombed. I'm not going to name names or anything today, but there's a few we've looked at that, hey, we can't use that, and can't use that today because it's not developed enough, or we don't have enough track record with it, or it's not delivering what we need it to deliver. So don't be afraid to experiment. And I was literally sitting here this week preparing for this, and I looked up, and I think CNBC was on the TV, and the lead AI guy from Google was there talking about this new technology they just released around creating podcasts. And so my disclaimer, we didn't use this technology. Charles and I are live. We're not AI generated, okay? Just so you know, we didn't use it. But you could drop a brochure into this technology, and it created, in about 4 minutes, a 15-minute podcast that sounded so natural and so human, and went back and forth, and they were talking to each other. And so I got all excited about it, started sending it to Melissa and to Andrea and everybody. You got to see this. It's just amazing. And so there is a wild frontier out there for all of us to think about as we begin to use AI. But as Dr. Charles reminds us, be smart, analyze these unintended consequences, think about the candidate perception and the downline consequences of what you're doing, and don't be afraid to experiment. So I'll stop there. Unless Dr. Charles, you have something you want to say to wrap up, and we'll take questions after that.
Thanks so much for having me. I love talking about with you. Certainly you've seen it all when it comes to the recruitment world. So, it's really exciting to partner with somebody who's on the front lines of this.
Well, and to you for all your data analytics background and your insights, just wonderful. So thank you for joining again. Melissa?
No, thank you. If we have any questions, please type them in the chat or the Q&A. So it is very insightful. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions. If there are, I will type in an email. If you do have other questions, feel free to send us a note and we'll get back to you to that email.
Good deal. Well, I just want
Great. Well,
to thank you.
go ahead.
Yeah, just say thank you everyone for joining today. I know it was an hour of your
Yes.
time and hopefully it was insightful and helpful. Any questions, reach out to either that email or to Dr. Charles or myself, and we'd love to have continuing conversation with you about it. So best of luck in your AI journey, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Charles. Thanks, Darren. Appreciate your time.
Yep.